Hi everyone. So now that we've built a strong base in the last few videos, it's time for a practice problem where we can practically apply all that we've learned and learn more things that are required practically. So let's see what. So let's go through solving a programming problem with the 5 parts that we've already discussed. The first part, the problem. So the problem is that take two numbers given on separate lines as input and print their sum, difference and product on the screen. Okay, so that's what the problem is. Now let's think about how we can build an algorithm for this. So what are the list of instructions we'll have to perform so that we can solve this problem? So the first thing we have to do is take. That means that we have to read the two numbers and also store the two numbers in our program using some variables, right? So we store these two numbers in variables num1 and num2. Okay, how do we actually take or read input given by the user is something we'll see while coding, but it's fairly easy to understand. It's just a simple instruction in most common programming languages to take input. The second step would be to calculate the sum of num1 and num2. Okay, and once we've calculated it, we'll also need to store this value in a new variable, right, so that we can use it later on. So we calculate num1 plus num2 and store it in a new variable called sum. Okay, then the third step would be that similarly we calculate num1 minus num2 and also num1 into num2 and store these respectively in variables called diff and prod, okay, which stand for difference and product. Now the next steps 4, 5 and 6 would just be outputting or printing, as we've learned before, the values of these variables on the screen, right? So that's all that our algorithm is, right? We first take input, then we calculate the sum, difference and product, and we store them in new variables, and then we output the values of these variables, right? Now let's move on to the coding part. Okay, so we're here on HackerRank again, and let's read the problem statement quickly once. So the problem statement says that the provided code, which is highlighted here on the right side, reads two integers from stdin. Now what is stdin? Stdin is short for standard input. Standard input is just the default place from which the computer reads input given by the user. Okay, and how does the computer do this? What are the commands that we have to give to it? What is that instruction? We learn this. Okay, then the question says that print on 3 different lines the sum, the difference and the product of the two numbers. Okay, so that's all that there is in the question. An important thing to note is the input format given here, which says that the first line will have the first integer and the second line will have the second integer. So that's how the input will be given to us. It will be two separate lines which will have two different integers instead of both the integers being on the same line, right? And the output format is that we have to print the 3 lines. The first line should have the sum, then the difference and then the product. Okay, so let's start writing code for this now based on the algorithm that we've discussed. I'm going to remove this code stub that they've provided because I would like to start from scratch. Okay, so just go ahead and select that and remove it. Right now let's start from the basic. The first thing we have to do is take or read this input given by the user, right? So in Python, the command we use for that is called input. Okay, so in Python the command we use for that is called input. What this command does is that it reads the entire line given in the place where it's reading input from, which is usually stdin, and so yeah, it reads the entire line and it returns that as a string. Okay, as a string, that's important. So when it returns that value, we need to store that value somewhere, right? So let's store that value in a variable. So let's say line 1 is my variable and I'm saying that that is equal to input, right? Fairly simple. Line 1 is the variable in which I'm storing the entire first line, which is read by the instruction input. Okay, and this line 1 has the data type of a string because that's how the computer reads the first line, as a string. Okay, we do the same thing for line 2, right? Because our second number is on line 2. Okay, now we encounter a problem. The problem is that both these numbers that we've read, which are supposed to be on line 1 and line 2 in these variables, they are stored as strings, right? So they're actually, if the number given to us on line 1 is 3, it's not stored as the integer 3 like this. Instead, in line 1, it's stored as a string 3, right? This is different. So how do we convert this string 3 to an integer 3, right? We do that by something known as typecasting. So let's just take a little detour and discuss what is typecasting first. So typecasting means changing the data type of the data from its current data type into an other desired data type if it's possible. Okay, this is what we want to do, right? In our program, we want to change the data type of line 1, which is a string right now, to an integer, right? So that we can perform arithmetic operations with it. So let's see some examples for this. So this is what we have currently somewhat in line 1. This would be an example of that, right? We have a number which is stored as a string right now, right? We want to convert this to an int, to an integer. So we can do that easily by typecasting, and this is something that is possible. It is allowed. Okay, but another example that isn't possible is to convert a string like hello or John or any string that has characters into an int. If I try to typecast like this, my program is going to throw an error. Okay, so that's all you need to know about typecasting. It's changing the data type of your data from the current data type to an other data type if this change is logically possible. Okay, now let's see how we actually do typecasting in code. So we're back on HackerRank and we wanted to typecast line 1, right? The way to convert a string into an integer, to do integer typecasting in Python, is to use something known as int, right? This is an instruction that performs typecasting for us. So you just write int, and inside this you write the name of the variable that you want to typecast. So let's write line 1 here, right? What this instruction will do is it will take the data in line 1 and convert it to an integer data type. Okay, after this we also need to store the value that this gives, right? So we'll store it in an other variable called num1. Okay, so what this line 4 of code does is that it takes line 1, typecasts it into an integer, and then stores it in num1. Okay, we do the same thing for num2, which was at line 2, right? So that's it. The first step of our algorithm is complete. We wanted to take the input, read it, and store it as integers, right, in variables num1 and num2. We've done that. Now let's go to the second step. So let's make a variable sum. Okay, now and write this as num1 plus num2. Okay, this should be fairly easy to understand. All we're doing is calculating num1 plus num2 and storing that value in the variable sum. But you might see a problem here. You see, in the other variables that we've used, they aren't bolded and colored red how this variable sum is, right? What is the reason for that? The reason for that is that sum is actually an other instruction that is sometimes used in Python whenever required. Okay, like input is an instruction, and int is an instruction. Sum is also such an instruction. So using these words that are meant as instructions to your computer as variable names is something that is not only bad practice, it can also cause errors in your program. So instead of using this name sum, let's change this name to something like add. Now if you look at the code, the variable name is again blue and unbolded. So this means that we can use this as a variable name, right? The next thing that we want to do is store the difference. Okay, so diff is equal to num1 minus num2 and the product. So prod is equal to num1 into num2 in these two variables, diff and prod. So these lines are self-explanatory, and now the last step of our program is outputting these on 3 different lines. So we learned how to output exact data onto the computer screen, right, using the statement print and then writing whatever data we want to output within these quotation marks, right? But how do we output the value of the variable add? It's really simple. Just remove the quotation marks and then write the variable name. What this will do is it will find the value of the variable add and print that value. Okay, so and then print that value on the first line and then move to the next line also. So now if you just write print diff, this print diff will be written on the next line. Okay, that's what we want. And now we can write print prod. So this print prod will also be printed on the next line. So that's the entirety of our code, and that's where our algorithm also ends. Let's try to run this to see if it works correctly. Right, so it does run correctly, but this doesn't cover all the cases, just some sample cases. So let's try to submit the code to see if it works correctly every time. And yes, it does work correctly every time. All the cases are true. So that's it. That's all about this sample program. I wanted to add a few things. So not only do we want our code to be precise and understandable, we also want it to be concise, right? So instead of writing line 1 is equal to input and then doing num1 is equal to int of line 1, we can skip this step, right, and even this step, and directly write num1 is equal to int of input and num2 is equal to int of input. So what this is going to do is so you just go from the innermost bracket, you work outside, right? So the innermost bracket is input, the innermost instruction is input. So that is going to take the input of the first line and return it as a string, and the outer function or the outer instruction int is going to typecast this string into an integer, right? And that value can then be stored in num1. This is fairly easy to understand. We've just replaced line 1 with input, which was the original value of line 1, right? And similarly, that's what we've done for line 2 also. So this does work. Let's just try submitting it, and yeah, it's the same thing. So it does work. And yeah, that's all that there is for the code. Thank you for watching.